obviously, the first time someone meets Prabhupada, it's the seminal event, the watershed event of their life. You know, we hear, well, where were you when Kennedy was shot, or this or that. People have these historical events that they associate with. And so, obviously, for every devotee that ever got an opportunity to meet Prabhupada, that's the seminal event in their lives. That's the highlight of their entire existence, is when you actually meet Prabhupada for the first time. And when Prabhupada came to Gainesville, it was actually a very, very meaningful visit, in the sense that Prabhupada wasn't there for any managerial purposes. Gainesville was not a big, important temple. If I had said to anybody at the time, I'm from Gainesville, Florida, they would look at me like I'm crazy. Where are you from? Where's that? Nobody had ever heard of Gainesville. It wasn't even on the ISKCON map, so to speak. And so for Prabhupada to come to this place in the middle of nowhere was actually a very amazing event, so to speak. And when Prabhupada actually came, he was engaged in preaching the whole time he was there. We had set up engagements. So he was preaching the whole time he was there. But it was very interesting, because when he came and he gave his introductory lecture when he first arrived at the temple room, he said quite appropriately, I'm very happy to be here in this very remote place, thousands and thousands of miles from the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Mayapur. Now, obviously, every place in America is somewhat remote from Mayapur. But in LA, for example, you can get on a plane, you can be in Calcutta in 22, 23 hours, and in 3 hours more on a car, you're in Mayapur. But to even get, I can't remember whether Prabhupada came from New York or Detroit or Chicago, it was one of those places, because there were a lot of devotees that got initiated right before me in those places. So Prabhupada was coming in from New York or some northern city, and he had to go to Atlanta and change planes in Atlanta. And then he had to go to Jacksonville from Atlanta and then drive 2 hours to get to Gainesville. So by the time he gets to Gainesville, he says, I'm very happy to be in this very remote place. And I'm so happy to see all these boys and girls that are chanting and dancing in the middle of nowhere. And there was a reporter there, and she was actually quite friendly with the devotees. I was good friends with her. And she asked Prabhupada one significant question that stands out in my mind. Why are there only young people in your movement? Why aren't there any old people? And Prabhupada gave a very good analogy. And he said, at this university, what do you see there? You see only young people. You don't see any old people. Why is that? See, because when you're young, he said, that is the time. That is the time for your spirituality. That's when is the best period of your life for taking to this process. And he said, it is too late for the old fools. And everybody laughed, of course. Nobody was offended by that. But it was got the point across quite effectively. So Prabhupada came and he lectured, and all the local reporters were there. So that was, Prabhupada was enlivened by that. And then from there, he bathed and took a shower or whatever, took a bath and changed. And then he came out to the university, to the plaza. That's where he spoke, on the Plaza of the Americas, which is the same place we used to have those anti-war demonstrations, and the same place where Gargamuni came, somewhat like Tompkins Square Park, so to speak, sitting down in a park, same formula. So Prabhupada was on a stage, and he spoke on the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad-gita, on Sankhya Yoga. And it was a very sophisticated lecture. It was a very high-level philosophical presentation, and I was thinking, well, how are they going to understand this? I can barely understand this. This is so intellectual and philosophical. I don't even understand this. How are the students going to understand? There were about 700 or 800 students there, and but afterwards, all the students came up and said, "Oh, that was the best lecture I ever heard in my life. That was great. That was wonderful. I enjoyed it so much." And it just, Prabhupada knew exactly where he was and who his audience was. At all times, he was cognizant of the message that he wanted to present to the audience. And for this group of students, he chose the sixth chapter of the Bhagavad-gita. And it made a big impression on them. And many people came, even years and years afterwards, who were there still remember. It was for them also a watershed moment in their lives. They'll never forget that. They'll take that with them whether they become a devotee or not for the rest of their lives. It made a big impression on them. When the community, the whole city found out that Prabhupada was coming, they were actually very excited. And the local newspaper the next day ran a story on the front page with a picture of Prabhupada on the plaza. Hare Krishna leader comes to Gainesville. And there was one professor at the university who ran the TV station. There was a campus TV station. It was actually the PBS station, the public broadcasting station. And as soon as he heard that Prabhupada was coming, he started calling me every day. He wanted desperately to do an interview with Prabhupada. He was so determined that Prabhupada would appear. He had an evening show, he had an interview show, and would have prominent guests on his program. And so he was bugging me every day, please bring Bhaktivedanta. Please, can we have an interview with Bhaktivedanta? I would be so happy, I would be so grateful. So finally, Prabhupada agreed to do it. So he was quite ecstatic. So that evening, after we got back from the plaza, Prabhupada rested a little bit and had some visitors, darshan with some Indians and other guests. And that evening, about 8:30, we went to the TV station for an interview. And that's been published. That's called Transcendental Broadcast. And it's the BBT published a little booklet of that interview. And the thing I remember most about the interview was the professor, Mark Damon was his name actually, kept trying to get Prabhupada to say something provocative or controversial. They said, why have you come to him? And he knew the philosophy quite well. He had read some books to brush up before the interview, and he knew about Lord Chaitanya, he knew the history, he knew about Prabhupada being instructed by Bhaktisiddhanta to come to the West. And he said, but he still wanted to make the program ratings friendly, so to speak, by getting Prabhupada. Hare Krishna leader says Christian religion is no good and everyone should become Hare Krishnas. So he kept trying to get Prabhupada to say something like that, and Prabhupada would not take the bait. And he said, no, we're not here to, we are simply saying, chant the name of God. You've got your name of God, you can chant that, that's okay. We don't say you must chant our name of God, but just chant the name of God. That is our process. And so Prabhupada kept giving him these answers, these non-sectarian answers. And so this interviewer, our professor, he was getting cut to pieces, but Prabhupada was doing it so smoothly that he didn't even know it. He couldn't even understand it. It's like getting cut with a razor blade. It's so sharp, you never even realize it till all the blood is pouring out. So Prabhupada was defeating him at every turn and not taking his bait. And every time Prabhupada would kind of score a point, if you're in a debate and you're keeping score, Prabhupada, we were all behind the cameras. And Prabhupada was beautiful because, and I'm not saying that, a lot of people say, he was glowing, this, that, He had the TV lights on him, and so that you could see the eyes, the lights in his eyes, and his golden skin was highlighted, and his saffron clothing was highlighted also. But every time that Prabhupada would score this point, for example, Christ said, thou shalt not kill. Why are you killing? Why are you killing? He never said, thou shalt not kill only human beings. He said, everybody, thou shalt not kill. He was making these points, and then he'd kind of glance over at the devotees. We were behind the cameras, and he'd have this little twinkle in his eye and this little smile on his face because he knew he was defeating this guy. Not that that was so important to Prabhupada, but he knew, and the devotees were really relishing this discussion or debate. And Prabhupada just kind of glance over, and we see this little twinkle in his eye. And And then the professor invited all the devotees to come in front of the cameras and chant. So it was a very auspicious program. I asked Prabhupada, how can we make people Krishna conscious? You know, we're always trying to think of some profound question to ask Prabhupada or something. So I said, Prabhupada, how can we make people Krishna conscious? And I was expecting some elaborate answer, formula. You do this, you do this, you do this. And Prabhupada said, you simply request that they chant Hare Krishna, and then your business is finished. And he repeated it. And devotees sometimes say, well, I was in the audience and Prabhupada said something. It was almost as if he was talking to me. Well, Prabhupada was talking to me, but I wasn't listening. You see, I wasn't listening because I have many defects and many frailties, but the worst of them is attachment to the fruits. Very fruitive. I'm very passionate and very attached to the fruits of my labor, even though it's dovetailed in Krishna consciousness. When I was in Gainesville preaching to students, I was desperately wanted them to become devotees, almost willing them with my mind, you must become a devotee. I wanted to take away their free will and make them a devotee. And later on, when I was a lawyer, winning and losing cases, I was so attached to winning for Krishna, but still winning nonetheless, because I was not listening to Prabhupada that night. I didn't hear what he said, because when he said, then your business is finished, that's right out of the Bhagavad-gita, you have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but you have no right to the fruits of your endeavors. That is up to Krishna, and that belongs to Krishna. And I just didn't hear Prabhupada what he was saying. He was talking to me because he knew this guy's attached. He has these attachments. But I didn't hear. I do remember him making a comparison of the material world to a lion, and how people voluntarily choose to stay in the material world and subject ourselves to all of this suffering and birth, death, disease, and old age, and adhyatmik, adhibodhik, adhidaivik, and so forth. And he said, well, and Prabhupada said, why would you do that? Why would people choose this? It's like a lion. You don't go up to a lion and say, oh, Mr. Lion, please open your mouth. I wish to enter. It's like we're asking Maya, open your jaws and let us enter into this miserable condition of life. And that's all I remember that Prabhupada said that night. Then the next morning, he was only there for a short period of time, and we took him back to Jacksonville the next morning. I wasn't there when he arrived because I was back at the temple. I was the temple commander at the time, and so I was busy fixing up the temple, finishing the Vyasasana and so forth. But that next day, when we took Prabhupada back to Jacksonville to catch his flight, we were in the airport waiting. And of course, in those days, you could go past security. We didn't have all this 9/11 security checks like we do now. So we were all in the waiting area, and Prabhupada was sitting in a chair waiting for his flight, the plane to leave, to board. And there was a kirtan in the airport, and all people started to gather around the perimeter of the waiting area. A big crowd, a sizable crowd had formed of people just wanting to know what's going on here. This is Jacksonville, Florida. And a place where every time we would do Harinam, we would get arrested because of all the Christian persecution there, so to speak, and we were just heathen to them, these Eastern idol worshippers and so forth. But a crowd had formed, and I was sitting right at Prabhupada's feet, and I thought, oh, I'm really right, I must be special because I'm sitting right here at Prabhupada's lotus feet. Wow, what mercy. But Hridayananda and Ananga Manjari, who was his wife at the time, when they saw the crowd, they got some books, and they went out and they started distributing books to the people in the crowd. And Prabhupada saw them do this. And when Prabhupada saw them, the entire time that he stayed in that terminal, he did not take his eyes off them. He watched them the entire time while they were passing out books. And I understood at that point, oh, if I want to please Prabhupada, I can see he's not paying any attention to us. We're chanting, we're here, but he's watching Vinananda and Nangamajari distribute books. So it told me quite a bit about how to get Prabhupada's attention, distribute his books. He had a darshan with a reporter for the New York Times. The New York Times had always taken somewhat of a keen interest in New Vrindavan for some reason. I don't know what the reason was. So there was a reporter for the New York Times there. And when I got to the darshan, he was speaking with Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said to him, he said, yes, I have seen your paper. It is so thick. But what do they do with it when they're finished? They throw it in the garbage. And at that time, the Macmillan Gitas had just come out. The big Macmillan Gitas had just come out. So Prabhupada had one on the coffee table in front of him. He said, put his hand on the Gita and he said, but this Bhagavad-gita, this they will keep forever. So this was, he put it, he said this with such love when he was so happy every time one of his books came out. And this book made Prabhupada very happy. So you could tell how important it was to Prabhupada every time a new book was published. Then later on in the darshan, this darshan went on for hours and hours. Later on, a devotee asked Prabhupada, what does it mean to love the spiritual master? What does that mean? And again, I kind of equated that to the love that I saw in some of those first devotees who had met Prabhupada on 2nd Avenue, Brahmananda, Gargamuni, Rupanuga. They actually considered Prabhupada their father. They had love for Prabhupada the way we would love our biological parents. That's how they loved Prabhupada, in my opinion, based on what I saw. And I knew them very well. I know them very well. I spent a lot of time with Satsarupa and Rupanuga, Gargamuni, Brahmananda, so forth, and I spent a lot of time with them, and I really was impressed how much affection, how much emotional attachment they had to Prabhupada. I didn't have that. I didn't have that. That's, like I said, they loved Prabhupada the way you would love your biological parents. And I didn't have that kind of love. And I don't have that kind of love for Prabhupada. I wish I did. Someday maybe I will, but I don't. So I was expecting that kind of an answer. But Prabhupada said, you have made vow to spiritual master, you take initiation, and you have taken fire sacrifice. Now you keep your vow. That is love. You keep your vow. You made a promise. Don't break your promise. Keep your promise, and that is love. So that blew everybody in the room away. Everybody was like stunned to hear that. Oh my God. Oh, what did I get myself into here? Oh boy, I'm finished. In 1972, in furtherance of my political aspirations, as I mentioned, I was a political radical before I became a devotee. And I kind of put all that aside when I became a devotee. But then Prabhupada was traveling, and when he would travel, Shyamasundar was his secretary, and wherever Prabhupada would go, Shyamasundar would send letters to all the temples telling everybody, well, Prabhupada was here and he saw this head of state, or had this engagement in what Prabhupada was preaching, and give us a kind of like a detailed account of Prabhupada's activities, like a diary or a journal. And so one day he wrote something about Prabhupada saying, well, we should enter politics, meaning the devotees should become involved in political activities. And it was in Africa. I don't remember the context, but it was in Africa. When I saw that just immediately, oh, politics, I can do that? I was like astonished. I said, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. So immediately I made arrangements, or I started working on a political preaching program. And by that I mean, because of the different election laws, all you had to do is get a certain number of signatures on a petition and turn it into the registrar, and you could get on the ballot for some elected position. And then, once you're on the ballot, if they had to invite you to every engagement and give you equal time under the Fairness Doctrine. Federal Communications Act has a fairness doctrine that all the candidates have to have equal time. So I wrote Prabhupada and told him about this. And Prabhupada, I got 2 letters in 1972, and where Prabhupada gave me his approval to do that. And he said, yeah, I like this very much. And those letters they're available in the archives or whatever. And they were really amazing letters. They weren't just for me, but Prabhupada was saying, he said, yeah, this is a very good opportunity to preach widely and distribute our books. So take advantage. So Prabhupada saw that as an opportunity, not so much that we were going to get elected, but that we could use that as an opportunity to preach and to distribute books. But he did say a few things in the first letter I got that kind of relate back to that anti-war demonstration. He said our platform is very simple, that regularly the people should come together and have kirtan. And then afterwards, there should be wide-scale distribution of Krishna Prasadam. So that is our platform. He said, who will not be attracted? And he said, yes, I want that you should endeavor for these political posts. You should expose these Nixons and replace them. That's a quote from a letter. And this is before Watergate. He said, you should expose these Nixons and replace them. And he said, politician means pickpocket, tell the people whatever they want to hear to get elected, and then pick their pocket because in 2 or 4 years they know they could be out of office, so they grab all the money they can in the meantime. And that's kind of like relevant to what's going on right now contemporaneously with all this fiscal cliff stuff in American politics with the budget and the debt, the national debt and so forth. But it's all because the politicians have ruined everything. Prabhupada said the people are innocent. These are all in the letters that he sent. He said people are innocent, but these rascal leaders have misled them. So I am very much encouraged that you boys and girls should expose these Nixons and replace them. And he gave us a lot of tremendous encouragement that also we have a grave responsibility, seeing the condition of the world. Prabhupada was exhibiting his Vaishnav, that Vaishnav sentiment of Prahlad Maharaj and Advaita Acharya to the suffering of the conditioned souls makes the pure devotees suffer. He suffers seeing them suffer because it's all based on identification with this body. And the political leaders keep people in bodily concept of life with the assistance of the material scientists to give them all of this facility for sense enjoyment. And in the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada, he spares no quarter. He attacks the politicians viciously over and over again, especially in the first canto with the story of Parikshit Maharaj, fourth canto with Prithu Maharaj. He really goes after the politicians. So Prabhupada liked this idea of getting in the middle of that phenomena, or getting in the middle of that whole process and interrupting it, sabotaging it, so to speak, and changing the agenda. And all of our political programs, by the end of that, whatever it was, a radio program, TV program, a debate, all the other candidates for whatever the office was would be saying, oh yeah, I believe in God, I go to church, I do this, I do that. They were all trying to justify their spiritual qualifications for the. So we were actually able or successful in changing the discussion from all of these ridiculously stupid and mundane issues to something that was really important. Because Prabhupada says over and over again, the only solution is God-conscious leadership. In 1972, earlier that year, before the New Vrindavan Festival, I went down to Miami Beach for the 1972 Republican Convention. And with Mahavir, who was a good friend of mine, we put together a prasadam program for all the demonstrators that were camping out on Miami Beach at a place called Flamingo Park. So every day we'd bring prasadam out there and to feed all the protesters and so forth who were there to disrupt the Republican Convention. And Nixon, of course, was being nominated at that convention. And so we became very popular. And one night we were having a street sankirtan in front of the convention center, and it was getting dark. It was kind of like, you can edit this out later on. It's just kind of a prelude to that other darshan I had with Prabhupada. But it was getting dark, and we were going through the crowd single file, and we really couldn't see where we were. We knew we were on a sidewalk outside of the Miami Beach Convention Center, and we were going single file. There were about 8 or 9 of us. Sridham was leading the kirtan. And then all of a sudden, all these TV lights just go on. Out of the darkness, these lights just... And we looked around, and on one side, we see thousands of these angry anti-war demonstrators. And they were mad, and they were getting ready to storm the convention center. They were going to storm it and crash the convention and disrupt it. Of course, on the other side, there were hundreds and hundreds of police in their riot gear, and National Guardsmen and state police, and they were in their gas masks and shotguns, and we were right smack dab in the middle between these two camps, so to speak. And when we saw that, we looked around and we saw where we were. The whole Sankirtan party spontaneously went about 3 or 4 feet up in the air. And we just started chanting for our lives because we thought we were going to get caught right in the middle of this confrontation. So we started chanting like crazy. And as we were chanting, the crowd started to mellow out a little bit. Allen Ginsberg was there. He came up, he started chanting with us. And then the anti-war leaders, the leaders of the anti-war demonstration, they came up to us and they were so furious. They were outraged. They said, "You're ruining it for us. You're ruining this demonstration. You got to get out of here. You got to stop this chanting right now," because, sound vibration. They were chanting their chants about 1, 2, 3, stop. We don't want your blanking war, bleeping war, this and that, all those things that they used to. And they had the crowd worked up through sound vibration, through the ether that was traveling on the ether. But when we started chanting, we kind of like neutralized the impact of their sound vibration by the Maha Mantra, and people started mellowing out. And in a few minutes, some people started dancing, and a few minutes later, more and more people started dancing and mellowing out. And then a detective from the Miami Beach Police Department came up to us and said, could you just lead these people back to the park? So we went back to we headed back to the park, and the whole crowd just followed us back to the park. And later on, that same police detective came up to us and bought a book and gave a donation and said, "You guys stopped a riot. There was a riot that was about to happen, and you guys stopped it." And I told Prabhupada that story at this other darshan. I don't think anybody else was actually even there. Somehow I was just in the room with Prabhupada, and I told Prabhupada that story, and Prabhupada said, "Oh, just see the power of the holy name." Prabhupada was staying on the 3rd floor of the Pittsburgh Temple at the time, and I was up on the 3rd floor one day, and I don't know what I was doing there, but Prabhupada was in the room with a couple of reporters, so I went in and I sat down, and these reporters were interviewing him, and one reporter asked him, "Do you really think you can take over the world? Are you serious?" And Prabhupada never missed a beat. He never was off message, even for an instant. Not even for a heartbeat was he off message. always determined, always his eyes on the ultimate goal. So Prabhupada, without even skipping a beat, yes, if they will only listen to me. Again, hearing from the spiritual master, hearing from the pure devotee, if they will listen, which is what I was not doing when I got initiated, then we can take over the world. In Chicago, 75, I'm not sure, Prabhupada came for the Chicago Rath Yatra. I was in one darshan, and Prabhupada said several things that stood out in my mind. First of all, he said there would be a war with China. I'd never heard that. He had talked about being India and Pakistan being the spark that ignites World War III. He had said that many times. And by the way, that's still a distinct possibility. That could still happen at any time. It's not like, in terms of geopolitical reality, India and Pakistan is always a possibility. They both have nuclear weapons. It could happen at any time. But he said, the Chinese, I don't know how we got on that subject, but he said the Chinese, yes, there will be a war with China. And everybody was kind of like shocked. Prabhupada never said that before. And he said, yes, the Chinese, they are the lowest because they will eat anything. Therefore, they are lowest. I said, Prabhupada, isn't there any way to avoid it? And Prabhupada just shook his head, no. They will eat anything. He said that several times. And then he said also, he was talking about Guru Maharaj Ji, that little boy that used to dress up like Krishna. They were so offensive because he'd dress up like Krishna and he'd have his gopis, and everybody knew what a fraud it was except his own followers. So somebody had told him, that about this little kid, and he's claiming to be Krishna, he's claiming to be God. And Prabhupada got quite furious, he got quite angry. He said, he is claiming to be God? You kick on his face with boot, and then we will see if he's God. And everybody laughed. And Prabhupada said, no, he says he is God, he says he is Krishna, you kick on his face with boot. Prabhupada was serious. He said it. When he said it, he wasn't joking around. He never smiled. He never, oh, I'm only joking, I don't really mean that. He said, you kick on his face with boot. And then I think I asked them, I said, well, they're chanting Hare Krishna, Prabhupada. Won't they get any benefit? And Prabhupada said, yes, they will get benefit, but it will take them a very, very, very long time because they're so offensive in the process, imitating Krishna's pastimes, claiming to be Krishna and the gopis and so forth. We got to see Prabhupada in like the Sringadev mode. He was furious. I mean, it's not like this Guru Maharaj Ji thing where he got angry. He was furious in Bombay when they wouldn't give us the occupancy permit. He was outraged. He was obsessed with it day and night, that he couldn't believe it. And in India, the land of Krishna appeared, the land where Krishna spoke Bhagavad-gita, that they would not give a Krishna temple an occupancy permit. He couldn't believe it. And every darshan, every class, he would just pound the politicians and pound the Indian government. He was so angry. I'd never seen Prabhupada like that before, and never saw him in that mood again, but he was definitely in a Sringadev mode. And all of us were running around trying to meet with politicians. Balavanth and myself were meeting with politicians and trying to get this thing straightened out, and we'd come back every day and no, we didn't get anything done today. So finally, Prabhupada himself, he met with the leader of the local Shiv Sane party. I think they're still in existence in India. And Prabhupada himself met with the political leaders of the Shiv Sane party, and they were so impressed with Prabhupada that they gave us the permit. But Prabhupada himself finally intervened and was able to pull those strings to get that permit, even though Mr. Nair had so many politicians on his side. But Prabhupada trumped him. In other words, when Mr. Nair sold the property to ISKCON, sold, quote unquote, the ISKCON, it was a scam. He, as I said, he was going to take the money that we had paid him, and he was going to keep it, and then he was going to pull some strings to get the property back. Because Juhu was extremely valuable. Not even so much then, but as it is today. Today it's like Beverly Hills real estate. It's like South Beach or something like that. It's prime. So it was a scam, and Mr. Nair was trying to cheat us. He was trying to just do this scam sale, and then later on he's going to pull some political strings and get the property back. But Prabhupada outsmarted him. He, first of all, he moved the devotees onto the property, set up, and then he installed the deities on the property, thinking they'll never, once the deities are there, no Indian ever in a million lifetimes would ever disturb the deities or challenge the deities. So Prabhupada, he had a strategy. It's like he was from Goloka Vrindavan, but he also knew everything about this political warfare. He was, fully a brilliant tactician as far as that goes. So he moved the devotees onto the property, installed the deities, and his strategy was that in India they will never ever challenge our ownership of the property once he did that. And he believed he was going to trump Mr. Nair by doing that. He was going to foil Nair's scheme because he was on to Nair. He was not in any illusion about it. He knew what Nair was up to, but he trumped it. He moved like a chess game. He moved his pieces, tactically, and they were perfect. They were exactly the right moves. That's why he was so astonished when we didn't get the occupancy permit. Because what they were doing, you have installed deities in India. What to speak of Krishna and Bhagavad-gita? Prabhupada couldn't believe it. He was astonished. And not only was he astonished, he was furious, like I said. And every darshan we would go to, he would just start railing, and the anger was just pouring out of him. It was just palpable. You could feel it. I mean, everybody was like, we all felt like Lord Nrsingadev was in the room, and we were like the demigods running for cover or something. Not that I'm a demigod or anything like that, but we were running for cover because he was so angry. But in the end, it was Prabhupada himself who intervened when all of us running around like chickens with our head cut off, trying to do this and do that and get this done and get that done. Prabhupada himself got tired of waiting, and he met with these political leaders of the Shiv Sane party, and afterwards everything worked itself out. Got the permit, and the rest is history. My impression was that in America, he kind of deferred to the Americans. Like in my letters on the political program, Prabhupada said on one occasion, he said, at one time I was also interested in politics, and I was involved in Gandhi's non-cooperation movement. But I am not so interested anymore. So you all Americans, you do what you think is best. Just make Krishna the center. Don't forget about Krishna. So he would kind of defer to the Americans. That's your country. He didn't want to appear to be some like Svengali guru from India putting a spell on everybody and all of these disciples and so forth. But he was very deferential to the Americans, and Americans managing according to American customs. But in India, he was very, very involved in every detail of Indian management. So therefore, in America, while he would not get involved in a situation here, in India was a different story. So he would personally get involved in these situations, whether it be construction or politics or whatever, but he was expert in every aspect of it. He revealed that not only did he have full spiritual knowledge, but within that spirituality is also the material energy is just part and parcel of the spiritual energy. He was a master tactician and expert in manipulating the material energy on behalf of Krishna, to spread Krishna consciousness, spend Lord Chaitanya's movement. He was not daunted by material affairs in the slightest. on this occasion, we were in Prabhupada's quarters, and there was a bhajan. I don't remember whether it was Bhakti Vinod or Bill Mangal or who it was, but there was a bhajan, and so we were chanting bhajan, and so afterwards, Prabhupada was giving a little purport for the meaning of the bhajan, and he said, this is something that also served me well later on, very well later on. He said, yes, this chanting and dancing in the association of devotees is very powerful. And he said, the association of devotees, even if it becomes intolerable, you must still tolerate. That's how important it is. Tolerate the intolerable. And that always, that's what got me through so many trials and tribulations over the years. Not so much the ordinary things with Adhyatmika, Adhidaivic, and Adhibautic, those kind of trials, but the ISKCON trials and tribulations, let's be honest here, you know, if we're talking about posterity, I mean, it's not always been an easy road surviving in ISKCON. And the politics have sometimes, many times, been hot and heavy. And I've certainly been in my share of those political battles over the years, especially as a lawyer for ISKCON. A great deal of my time has been spent, I would say, lobbying ISKCON to do in a certain way for legal strategy and so forth. So I'm certainly not a novice at it, but that instruction from Prabhupada that no matter what, you must tolerate the intolerable, has what's gotten me through all these years. Well, I am still somewhat involved. Well, I am pretty involved, but I'm still in the mood. I'm still here is because of remembering Prabhupada's instructions. In that, also in retrospect, reminds me of the story of Bali Maharaj and everything that he had to go through when he had conquered the entire universe and taken over the heavenly planets, and then Lord Vamanadev defeated him, and he was arrested. And Prabhupada says in one of the purports, he said that any other person would have died had they had to go through what Bali Maharaj went through. He called it an examination. These trials and tribulations are an examination. And then Krishna puts us through these trials and tribulations, pushes us to the limit, but simultaneously gives us the strength to survive, to make it through these ordeals. It's kind of like the same principle. So that's always stuck out of my mind quite prominently as a good rule of how to survive. How to survive when your patience and your tolerance is pushed to the limit. You still have to keep pushing forward. Je anilo premadana koruna prachu